At 37 years old, Braylon, a systems engineer for the Lockheed Martin Space Division, made $128,000 a year. It was a good salary, a respectable salary, one that afforded him a comfortable life. But on the morning of Monday, October 16th, as he stood in the master bedroom of his $500,000 condo in lower downtown Denver, that number felt like an insult. The devastating situation wasn't in his bank account. It was standing across the room watching him pack. He folded a pair of his standard work chinos, the $70 Banana Republic kind, and placed them carefully into his $250 Samsonite roller bag. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the soft click of the zipper and the distant hum of Denver traffic. His wife, Sable, leaned against the door frame, a cup of steaming coffee held in her perfectly manicured hands. She was wearing a silk robe he'd bought her from a boutique in Cherry Creek, a $450 purchase he'd made for their anniversary 6 months ago. She hadn't worn it since. "Are you sure you have to go?" she asked. Her voice was a carefully curated blend of disappointment and boredom. "Another 5 days in San Diego? It feels like you were just there." Braylon didn't look up. "It's the Triton project integration. It can't be done remotely." This was the lie. It was a clean, technical lie, the kind he was good at. There was a Triton project, and there was an integration phase, but it wasn't happening this week, and it certainly didn't require his physical presence. The real devastating truth was that he wasn't going to the airport. He was going to his brother's apartment in the Highlands, a 7-mile drive across the city. This 5-day trip was a silent test, a diagnostic run on the failing system of his marriage. The thought of it coiled in his stomach, a cold, metallic dread. He was setting a trap for the woman he had promised to love forever, and the worst part was the chilling certainty that she would walk right into it. He had no idea just how right he was. What would you do if you suspected the person you loved most was living a double life? Before you answer, subscribe to Love Beyond Pride and join a community that understands these impossible situations. Braylon's story is a difficult one, but what he did next might change the way you think about trust and betrayal forever. Their life together, on the surface, was a meticulously constructed facade of modern success. They had met 5 years ago at a charity gala. He was there as a guest of a Lockheed vice president, feeling out of place in his rented tuxedo. She was working the event for a PR firm, a vision in a sleek black dress, her smile a dazzling high-wattage beacon. He was a quiet, steady man who built complex systems designed to function flawlessly under extreme pressure. She was a whirlwind of social energy, someone who could navigate any room with effortless grace. They were a study in contrasts, and for a while, that contrast was electric. He fell in love with her ambition, her fire. She seemed to admire his stability, his calm intelligence. Their courtship was a blur of trendy low-dough restaurants with $20 cocktails and weekend trips to Aspen in his reliable 2018 Honda Accord, a car he had proudly paid off 2 years early. He was a man who hated debt. She was a woman who loved the feeling of acquisition. After a year, he proposed with a modest but elegant 1.5-carat diamond ring that cost him a little over $9,000, a sum he had saved diligently for 6 months. She had cried, her joy seeming so genuine that it warmed him to his core. They were married at the Denver Botanic Gardens in a beautiful sun-drenched ceremony that cost a combined $45,000, a figure that made Braylon's palms sweat, but which Sable insisted was a necessary investment in our memories. They bought the condo in Lodo a month after the wedding. It was a 2-bedroom corner unit in a new glass tower with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. The price tag was $750,000. Braylon's $80,000 down payment, the entirety of his premarital savings, had vanished in a single wire transfer, but standing there with her, watching the city lights flicker to life, he felt a sense of profound accomplishment. This was the life they were building, a solid foundation, or so he thought. The foundation, he would later realize, was riddled with hairline fractures from the very beginning. Sable filled their new home with things, beautiful, expensive things. A sprawling white leather sofa that cost $8,000. A dining room table made from a single slab of reclaimed wood for $6,000. Her wardrobe expanded to fill the custom walk-in closet they'd had installed for another $15,000. She favored brands he'd never heard of, dresses that cost more than his monthly car payment had been. A $2,400 Burberry dress for a friend's birthday party. A $2,800 Chanel handbag she absolutely had to have. He tried to keep up, buying her a $1,500 Peloton bike for Christmas, hoping it was a shared investment in their health. She used it 3 times before it became a chic, expensive rack for her discarded clothes. His life, in contrast, remained simple. He wore the same $89 Timex watch he'd had for a decade. His side of the closet held his work-issued polos, his collection of practical hiking gear from REI, and a single $800 suit for formal occasions. He cooked, finding a quiet joy in preparing meals on the $12,000 quartz countertops she had picked out. He would try to show her his world, the simple beauty of a sunrise from a trail in the foothills. But she would complain about the early hour and the dirt. Her world was brunch at 5-star hotels and gallery openings, where people talked about art they had no intention of buying. He felt increasingly like a tourist in his own life, a silent financial partner in a lifestyle he didn't quite understand or enjoy. The love was still there, he told himself. It was just buried under a mountain of expensive receipts. The change began about a year ago. It was subtle at first, like a software glitch you can't quite replicate. A dismissive comment here, a cold shoulder there. The escalating betrayal wasn't a single explosion. It was a series of small, corrosive leaks that slowly poisoned everything. The first major crack appeared at a dinner party they hosted for her friends. It was a loud, boisterous affair filled with people who worked in finance and real estate, men who wore $5,000 Rolex watches, and women who laughed a little too loudly. Braylon was explaining a new satellite system he was working on, his voice filled with a genuine, nerdy passion. He saw one of the husbands, a man named Marcus, who ran a private equity firm, smirk into his glass of $200 Cabernet. Sable, noticing the exchange, cut in with a brittle laugh. "Oh, don't mind Braylon. He plays with expensive toys for the government." She turned to her friends, her voice dripping with a strange, performative pity. "My girls' husbands are out there building empires, and my sweet Braylon is making sure the GPS works so we can all find our way to brunch." The table erupted in laughter. It wasn't friendly laughter. It was sharp, cruel. Braylon felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. He looked at Sable, searching her face for a sign, a wink, anything to indicate it was just a poorly landed joke. But her eyes were cold, dismissive. She had offered him up to them as a sacrifice, a harmless, slightly pathetic mascot for their world of real power and money. He felt the vast emotional distance between their Lodo glass tower and the rest of the world, and for the first time he felt like he was on the outside looking in. He picked up his $15 wine glass, the wine tasting like ash in his mouth. From that night on, the name Zach began to surface. Zach had been her fiancé before him, a man she had described as exciting but unstable. They had a tumultuous, on-again, off-again relationship for years. Now suddenly, Zach was the gold standard. Zach, who had founded and sold a tech startup for a fortune, was the ghost haunting their marriage. The next battle was fought over the kitchen. Sable decided, seemingly overnight, that their state-of-the-art 3-year-old kitchen was dated. She presented Braylon with a proposal from an interior designer. The cost, $80,000 for new cabinets, Italian marble countertops, and top-of-the-line Sub-Zero appliances. Braylon, the systems engineer, pulled up his spreadsheets. He showed her their mortgage, their condo fees, their budget. He had a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. They were on track to be comfortable, to retire early if they were smart. "Sable, we can't afford this right now," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "An $80,000 renovation on a 3-year-old kitchen. The return on investment is just not there. We could use that money to pay down the principal on the mortgage. We'd save tens of thousands in interest over the life of the loan." She stared at the spreadsheet on his laptop screen as if it were written in a dead language. Her lip curled. "Return on investment? Braylon, this is our home, not a stock portfolio. This is about living, about having nice things." Her voice rose, laced with a familiar, cutting frustration. "You and your spreadsheets, you are always so limiting." Then came the killing blow. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Zach would have just written the check. He would have understood that this is important." The room went silent. The name hung in the air between them, an accusation and a comparison. He felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. It was the first time she had thrown Zach in his face so directly. "We are not Zach," he said, his own voice sounding hollow. "No," she'd replied, turning away from him. "We're certainly not." After that, the secrets multiplied. Her phone, a new $1,400 iPhone 14 Pro, was suddenly always angled away from him. She started taking calls on their small balcony, closing the glass door behind her, her voice a low, inaudible murmur against the city noise. One evening, he'd walked into their home office and seen her slam her $2,200 MacBook Pro shut. The next time he tried to use it to look up a recipe, it was locked with a password he didn't know. When he asked her about it, she waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, it's just for my work stuff. New company policy. You know how it is." He did know. He worked for Lockheed Martin, a company built on security protocols. He knew what a real security policy looked like, and this wasn't it. The final straw, the event that triggered the cold, methodical plan now in motion, came 2 weeks before the trip. Sable had told him she was going to a 7 p.m. hot yoga class in the Rhino district. He was working late at the Waterton campus, running diagnostics on a ground system, and didn't get home until after 10 p.m. The condo was dark. He found her asleep in their bed. The next morning, while paying their joint credit card bill online, a task he managed with the same precision as his work projects, he saw a charge from the night before. Timestamp, 8:47 p.m. The vendor, the cruise room, an upscale cocktail bar in the Oxford Hotel. Nowhere near the yoga studio. The amount, $78.50. Enough for 2 or 3 very expensive cocktails. He felt his heart hammer against his ribs. It was just a charge, he told himself. Maybe she went with friends after class. That evening, over the dinner he had cooked, pan-seared salmon with asparagus, he kept his tone casual. "How was yoga last night? Did you try that new instructor you were talking about?" She looked up from her plate, her expression perfectly placid. "Oh, it was amazing, so relaxing. I really needed it." She proceeded to describe the class in vivid, plausible detail. The instructor, the new sequence of poses, the heat in the room. Each word was a small, sharp stone hitting the fragile glass of his trust. She was lying. Lying smoothly, effortlessly, and without a flicker of hesitation. He felt nothing. That was the most terrifying part. The hurt, the anger, it was all there, but it was underneath a thick layer of ice, a cold, Clear, analytical calm descended upon him. A system that provides faulty data is compromised. It must be tested. The outputs must be verified against an independent source. He began planning the test that night, after she was asleep. He booked a refundable flight to San Diego he never intended to take. He emailed his manager, arranging to work remotely for a week on a special project, a white lie to secure his privacy. He called his brother. The trap was set. All he had to do was walk out the door. The drive from their gleaming Lodo Tower to his brother Rio's apartment in the Highlands felt like crossing into another country. He left behind the world of valet parking, concierge services, and $7 lattes, and entered a world of walk-up apartments, neighborhood parks, and authentic, lived-in character. Rio's two-bedroom apartment, which he'd bought for a modest $450,000 before the neighborhood became trendy, was on the top floor of a classic Denver brick building. It was filled with art books, half-finished canvases, and the warm, familiar scent of oil paint and freshly brewed coffee. Rio, a freelance graphic designer with kind eyes and a head full of intricate twists that he'd had for years, met him at the door. He didn't ask questions, not at first. He just wrapped his younger brother in a tight hug. The simple, unconditional acceptance of it almost broke the dam of composure Braylon was so carefully maintaining. "I made up the spare room for you," Rio said, taking the $250 Samsonite bag from his hand. "Whatever you need, man. It's yours." The spare room was small, containing only a bed, a simple pine dresser that probably cost $200 from IKEA, and a drafting table covered in Rio's sketches. On the wall was a framed drawing Rio's 7-year-old son, Leo, had made for Braylon last Christmas. It depicted a stick figure labeled Uncle Bray, standing next to a lumpy rocket, both of them smiling under a yellow crayon sun. Looking at it, at the pure, uncomplicated love in those waxy lines, Braylon felt a pang so sharp it almost buckled his knees. This was real. This was a foundation. What had he been building with Sable? A movie set? He set up his command center on the drafting table, his Lockheed-issued laptop for work, his personal tablet for the surveillance. He felt a grim irony in using the tools of his trade, system monitoring, data analysis, to dissect his own life. The first act was to open the Find My app. His heart pounded as the map loaded. A small circle with Sable's picture in it appeared. Location, home. 10:30 a.m. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. She was there. Of course she was there. What did he expect? A mad dash to her lover the moment his car was out of the garage? He spent the rest of Monday in a state of suspended animation. He logged into his work network, the familiar interface, a strange comfort. He answered emails. He ran a diagnostic script, but his mind was miles away, in a condo across the city. Every 20 minutes he would toggle to the tablet and refresh the Find My map. Home, still home. She went out once around 2 p.m. to the Whole Foods a few blocks away. He watched her little icon move in real time, a blue dot on a digital map representing the woman who shared his bed. It felt clinical, detached, and at the same time unbearably intimate. That evening, he and Rio ate pizza from a local place, sitting on Rio's worn-in $700 crate and barrel sofa. They drank cheap beer out of the bottle. It was the most relaxed meal Braylon had had in months. At home, dinners were an elaborate performance on their 150 per setting Villeroy and Bach china, with Sable often critiquing his choice of wine or the way he plated the food. "You gonna tell me what's going on?" Rio finally asked, his voice soft. Braylon stared at the TV, where a basketball game was playing on mute. He explained the test, the lies, the credit card charge, the constant feeling of being kept at a distance. He laid it all out, the data points of his failing marriage. Rio listened patiently. his expression growing grim. "I never liked her," he said quietly when Braylon was finished. "I tried. For you, I really tried. But she always looked at you like you were a project, something she was working on, not someone she loved." His brother's words, a truth Braylon had been avoiding for years, landed with quiet force. This black woman, she looked at your radiant, deep brown skin, your brilliant mind, and all she saw was a stepping stone, a man she could mold. I saw it from day one. On Tuesday, the waiting intensified. The day stretched before him, a long, empty corridor of time. He checked Find My Home. He tried to work, but the code on his screen blurred into meaningless symbols. At 11 a.m., her icon began to move. He watched, his breath catching, as it traveled down Spear Boulevard and into the heart of Cherry Creek. It stopped at the Cherry Creek Shopping Center. Then the credit card alerts began to ping on his phone. A notification from their joint Chase Sapphire Reserve account. First, Neiman Marcus, $934. He pictured her at the cosmetics counter, buying expensive creams and perfumes, a fleeting moment of retail therapy paid for by his long hours at the lab. An hour later, another ping, True Food Kitchen, $120.50. A healthy, expensive lunch for two. Who was she with? A girlfriend? Or someone else? The not knowing was a specific kind of torture. The final alert came at 3:30 p.m. A shoe store. Stuart Weitzman, $795 errors. He felt a surge of cold, white-hot anger. It wasn't just about the money, though the sheer waste of it, the complete disregard for their financial goals, was a slap in the face. It was the disrespect. He was living like a monk in his brother's spare room, eating cheap pizza and wrestling with a soul-crushing betrayal, while she was spending nearly $2,000 of their money on a Tuesday afternoon. He closed his work laptop. The pretense of productivity was gone. He opened a new file on his personal computer. It was a blank spreadsheet. He labeled it Marital Assets, B&S. He began to populate it, line by line. The condo, $750,000 market value, $580,000 remaining on the mortgage. Her BMW 3 Series, $43,000, with $22,000 still owed. His Honda Accord, paid in full. He listed his 401k, valued at a healthy $450,000 after 12 years of maxing out his contributions. He listed her much smaller IRA. He documented his unvested Lockheed Martin restricted stock units, a significant part of his future compensation, projected to be worth over $200,000. Then he opened a new tab, Denver Divorce Attorneys. He scrolled through the names, the slick websites, the promises of aggressive representation. He noted their hourly rates, $550, $700, $200. It was a world he never thought he'd have to enter. He read articles about Colorado divorce law, about the division of assets. Colorado was an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. It meant the assets would be divided fairly, not necessarily 50-50. He learned that infidelity itself didn't legally affect the financial outcome, but the dissipation of marital assets, like, for instance, spending thousands of dollars on luxury goods while your husband thinks you're grieving his absence, could. He screenshotted the credit card alerts and saved them to a new folder on his desktop labeled Evidence. The act of creating the folder, of typing that word, felt both empowering and deeply, profoundly sad. He was no longer just a husband. He was a plaintiff in waiting. He was a systems engineer, analyzing the catastrophic failure of his own life, methodically gathering the data that would explain the crash. He had no idea the most critical piece of data was still to come. Wednesday, day 3, the day the world broke. It happened at 11:15 a.m. Braylon was on a mandatory, mind-numbing conference call for work, a project status update where 20 people took turns reading slides to each other. He was on mute, his camera off, the disembodied voices of his colleagues a meaningless drone in his ear. The sky outside Rio's apartment was a brilliant, cloudless Colorado blue. Rain was forecast for the next day, a sign of the changing seasons. But for now, The sun was bright. On his tablet, he opened the Find My app. It had become a nervous tick, a constant compulsive need for information. The map loaded. He felt a familiar jolt, the little shock of seeing her location. But this time it was different. The icon wasn't in Lodo. It wasn't in Cherry Creek. It was in Cherry Hills Village. He stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process the information. Cherry Hills. The exclusive, sprawling suburb south of Denver, a world of gated communities, horse properties, and multi-million-dollar mansions. A place they had no friends, no connections. A place they had no reason to be. His finger, trembling slightly, zoomed in on the map. The dot was stationary on a quiet, tree-lined street called Cantido Lane. It was a neighborhood of palatial homes set far back from the road, hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Who did she know there? What was she doing there? The name hit him like a physical blow. Zach. He remembered a conversation from years ago before they were even married. Sable had been talking about her ex. A rare moment of unguarded reflection. She mentioned he'd bought a ridiculous mansion in Cherry Hills after his company was acquired. She'd laughed about it, calling it ostentatious and new money. Braylon's blood ran cold. He quickly toggled to the Chrome browser on his laptop. He opened a new tab, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He typed, Zachary Prescott, address Denver. He felt like a spy, a stalker. He felt disgusted with himself, but the need to know was a physical craving. A few clicks through a public record search site, a $4.95 fee charged to his personal credit card, and the information was there. Zachary Prescott, owner of 44 Cantido Lane, Cherry Hills Village, CO. He switched back to the Find My app. He zoomed in as far as the map would allow. The blue dot representing his wife was sitting directly on top of the satellite image of the massive, custom-built estate at 44 Cantido Lane. The house was a sprawling 8,000-square-foot modern monstrosity, complete with a tennis court and a sparkling blue pool in the backyard. A $4.2 million monument to someone else's success. The air left his lungs in a silent whoosh. The voices on the conference call, something about Q4 deliverables and synergy, faded into an incomprehensible murmur. He could hear the blood pounding in his ears. He looked at the time on the screen. 11:17 a.m. Then he looked at the location history. She had arrived at 11:02 a.m. He sat there frozen. For how long he didn't know. He was a systems engineer. His entire career was built on logic, on the predictable, repeatable laws of physics and code. If you do X, Y will happen. This was not logical. This was chaos. This was a violation of the fundamental code of his life. He spent the rest of the day in a fugue state. He made an excuse and dropped off the conference call. He couldn't speak. He couldn't think. He could only watch. He refreshed the app every 15 minutes. 1 p.m. The dot was still there. She had been there for 2 hours. Was she having lunch? A coffee? What were they talking about? 3 p.m. Still there. 4 hours. His mind replayed every dismissive comment from Sable, every cold look, every whispered phone call. They weren't random glitches. They were data points on a clear, terrifying trajectory. 5 recent 4 p.m. 6 hours. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Rio's apartment. Rio was out, meeting a client. Braylon was alone with the glowing screen and the wreckage of his marriage. He thought about her excuse for the bar near Cherry Hills, her detailed fictional yoga class. The lies weren't just lies. They were sophisticated, well-constructed narratives. How long had she been this person? Had he ever known her at all? 7 p.m. 8 hours. The sky outside was dark now. The city lights of Denver began to twinkle in the distance. And the dot, the relentless, damning blue dot, was still fixed in place. inside that $4.2 million house. He pictured the scene, the lights on inside, dinner being served, wine being poured. Was she laughing? Was she touching his arm? This was the moment that destroyed him, not the suspicions, not the financial betrayals, not even the lie about the yoga class. It was this, the silent digital confirmation. 8 hours. On a Wednesday. In her ex-fiancé's mansion, while her husband, the man she had promised to build a life with, thought she was at home. Missing him. The hope he didn't even realize he was clinging to, the tiny, foolish hope that this was all a misunderstanding, that he was being paranoid, evaporated. It left behind a vacuum, a cold, hard certainty. He felt his deep brown skin, usually warm and vibrant, turn cold and tight across his bones. He looked at his hands. They were perfectly still. The shaking had stopped. The grief and shock were being replaced by something else, something colder and sharper. The engineer was back online. The system had failed. Now it was time for a post-mortem. Now it was time to document the failure. The engineer and Braylon took over. The husband was gone, replaced by a man who dealt in data, evidence, and logical sequences. He sat at the drafting table in the growing darkness of his brother's apartment, the single glow from his tablet screen illuminating his grimly set face. The blue dot was a beacon of betrayal, but a single data source was not enough. He needed corroboration. He needed irrefutable proof. And then a memory surfaced. A fragment from a life that now seemed like a distant dream. About a year ago, they had run into Zach at a restaurant. It was awkward and stilted. Sable had been overly bright, Braylon had been polite, and Zach had been insufferably smug. He'd bragged about his recent acquisition, his new house, and, Braylon now remembered with crystalline clarity, his new impenetrable home security system. It's a full-ring ecosystem, Zach had boasted, swirling the ice in his $25 old-fashioned. Cameras on every corner, doorbell, floodlights, the works. You can't even step on the lawn without me getting a notification. At the time, Braylon had dismissed it as arrogant tech bro posturing. Now those words were a gift. He wouldn't have access to the footage, of course, but its existence was the key. A lawyer could subpoena it. The very threat of it would be leverage. He started a new document. He began taking screenshots of the Find My screen every 30 minutes, documenting the dot's continued presence, 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m., 9 p.m. Each screenshot was time-stamped, a digital breadcrumb trail of his wife's deceit. He slept for 2 hours, a shallow, dreamless sleep, and woke with a gasp at 5:15 a.m. on Thursday morning. The first thing he did, before his feet even touched the cold wooden floor, was grab the tablet. He opened the app. His breath hitched. The dot was still there. She had spent the night. She had slept in her ex-fiancé's bed in his $4.2 million mansion, while her husband was 3 zip codes away, thinking she was alone in their marital home. The final, brutal, undeniable confirmation. All the ambiguity was gone. All the what-ifs and maybes were incinerated in the harsh light of this new reality. He felt a strange, unnerving calm settle over him. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of stark, cold clarity. He knew exactly what he had to do. At 7:32 a.m., the dot began to move. He watched it pull out of the long, curved driveway on Cantido Lane. He watched it merge onto the highway, a tiny icon heading north, back towards Lodo, back towards the life she thought was waiting for her. Braylon stood up. He walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower, the water as hot as he could stand it. He washed away the grime of the last 3 days of waiting and watching. He was no longer a victim in hiding. He was an agent of consequence. He chose his clothes with deliberate care, not a suit. That was for the lawyer. He chose a crisp, dark navy polo shirt from Hugo Boss that cost him $450, a rare splurge he'd made for a work event. He paired it with dark, well-fitting jeans and his clean, simple leather sneakers. He looked neat, controlled, and serious. He was dressing for a demolition. When he walked into the kitchen, Rio was there, pouring coffee. His brother took one look at his face, and the worry in his eyes deepened. Rio's locks, usually tied back, were loose around his shoulders, and his face was etched with concern for his brother. "You sure you want to do this today, Bray? You can stay here. Let the lawyer handle it." Braylon shook his head. "No, this is my system, my failure analysis." He accepted the mug of coffee Rio offered. "I need to see the data for myself." The drive from the Highlands to Lodo was surreal. The city was waking up, people heading to work, grabbing coffee, living their normal Thursday lives. Braylon felt utterly detached from it all, as if he were watching a movie. He was a ghost, moving through a world that no longer felt like his. He pulled his Honda Accord into their designated spot in the underground garage of their building. He parked neatly between the white lines. A few spots down sat Sable's white BMW 3 Series, the $43,000 car he was still making payments on. A car she would no longer be driving. He took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The ride was silent, the polished chrome walls reflecting a stranger's face back at him, a man with hard eyes and a clenched jaw. He unlocked the door to their condo, their $750,000 monument to a shared dream, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of expensive coffee and a cloying floral perfume he didn't recognize. He walked through the living room, past the $8,000 white leather sofa, and into the kitchen. She was there, standing at the Nespresso machine, her back to him. She was wearing one of his old gray Lockheed Martin hoodies over a pair of silk pajama shorts. The sheer, staggering irony of her wearing his company logo, the symbol of the very work and stability she so openly disdained, almost made him laugh. "You're out of the Virtuo pods," she said without turning around, assuming he was the doorman with a package. "I'll be sure to pick some up," he said quietly. She froze. The coffee cup clattered against the saucer. She spun around, her face a mask of shock and confusion. "Braylon, oh my God, what are you... Your trip, I thought..." "The integration finished early," he said, his voice level, calm. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. He walked slowly toward her, stopping on the other side of the massive $12,000 quartz island. He took his phone out of his pocket. He didn't fumble. His movements were precise, economical. He placed the phone face up on the cold white surface of the quartz. He had the Find My app open, the screen showing her location history from the past 24 hours. The long, solid bar of time spent at 44 Cantido Lane. The departure at 7:32 a.m. Her eyes followed his hand. She saw the screen. The color drained from her face. Her skin, usually glowing, turned a pasty, grayish white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Good morning, Sable," he said again, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Did you sleep well?" "Braylon, what is this?" she whispered, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Have you been tracking me? That's insane? That's illegal?" "Is it?" he asked, a genuine question. "I'm a systems engineer. I see a system providing anomalous data. I investigate the anomaly. You told me you were at a yoga class. The data showed you were at the cruise room. You told me you were going to be home while I was gone. The data shows you were at your ex-fiance's house for over 18 hours. He let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his words, the sheer, damning specificity of them, sink in. He could see the gears turning in her head, the frantic search for an exit, for a plausible lie. "It's not what it looks like," she finally stammered, grabbing the edge of the counter for support. "Zach, he was having a crisis. His mother is sick. He needed a friend. I was just being supportive. Braylon didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He employed the callback technique, a method of using an opponent's own words against them. It was something he learned in a management seminar, but it felt perfectly suited for this moment. A crisis? He repeated, his voice flat. Is that what you call it? You said I was being cheap and limiting for not wanting an $80,000 kitchen renovation. You said Zach would have just written the check. It seems he's very generous with his time as well. She flinched as if he'd slapped her. That's not fair. You're twisting my words. Am I? He asked. He looked around the pristine designer kitchen. He looked at the Nespresso machine, the silk pajamas, the woman before him whose entire life was a carefully constructed performance. And then he delivered the quiet, devastating line that would end it all. There is nothing to fix, Sable, he said, his voice soft but final. The system has failed. The foundation is compromised beyond repair. I'm just here to document the wreckage. He picked up his phone from the counter, the screen still glowing with her betrayal. He didn't look at her again. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous, silent condo. He walked past the Chanel bag sitting on the entryway table, past the photos of their wedding day, and out the front door. He didn't slam it. He closed it softly behind him, the click of the lock a definitive final sound. The strike was over. The demolition had begun. The consequences cascaded with the swift, brutal efficiency of a failed system shutdown. Braylon, the methodical engineer, ensured it. By Friday morning, less than 24 hours after the confrontation, he was sitting in a plush leather chair in a downtown Denver law office. He had chosen the firm of Glassman and Associates, a high-powered family law practice that billed at a steep $750 per hour. To him, it was no longer an expense. It was an investment in a clean extraction. His lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, listened intently as he laid out the timeline. He didn't present it as a heartbroken husband. He presented it like a project manager delivering a post-mortem report. He had his folder labeled Evidence. Inside were the credit card statements with the suspicious charges highlighted, the printed, time-stamped screenshots of the Find My app showing Sable's 18-hour stay at 444 Candido Lane. He concluded with a calm statement about Zachary Prescott's known ring security system. We will subpoena the footage from Mr. Prescott's security system for the dates of October 18th and 19th, he stated. Not as a question, but as a fact. Ms. Davies looked at the meticulous folder, then back at Braylon. A flicker of deep respect showed in her eyes. Mr. Collins, she said, in 20 years of doing this, I have never had a client come in this prepared. This makes my job very, very easy. Braylon? He corrected her gently. And good. I like easy jobs. The divorce petition was filed electronically by noon. It cited irreconcilable differences but attached, as exhibits to a separate motion regarding the temporary division of assets, were the Find My screenshots and a declaration of Sable's significant dissipation of marital funds in the weeks leading up to the filing. The papers were served to Sable by a process server at 6:15 p.m. that evening at the Lodo condo. Her reaction came in the form of a series of voicemails left on Braylon's phone, which he had been advised by Ms. Davies not to answer. He sat in Rio's quiet apartment and listened to them on speaker, each one a step down into her personal hell. Voicemail 1, 6:30 p.m. A confused, frantic whisper. Braylon, I just got some papers. What is this? This is a mistake, right? Call me. We need to talk about this. Voicemail 2, 7:15 p.m. The confusion had morphed into anger. You can't do this. You can't just blow up our lives because of one stupid mistake after everything I've done for you, for us. You think you can just throw me out? This is my home too. Voicemail 3, 9:45 p.m. The anger had dissolved into pleading, sobbing desperation. "Baby, please, I'm so sorry. I messed up. I was lonely and stupid, and he was just there. It meant nothing, I swear. We can fix this. Please don't do this to us. I love you. I love you, Braylon. Please call me." He saved each voicemail and forwarded the audio files to Ms. Davies. He labeled them evidence, post-confrontation. The first consequence was the condo. Sable, on her part-time marketing salary of $45,000 a year, could not come close to affording the $4,800 monthly mortgage and HOA payment on the $750,000 property. Within a week, a judge signed a temporary order granting Braylon exclusive use of the marital home, given his ability to maintain the payments. Sable was given 48 hours to vacate. She was forced to move her expensive clothes and furniture into a storage unit and find a small, one-bedroom apartment in a dreary complex out in Aurora, a world away from the glamour of Lodo. Her new rent was $1,800 a month, a crippling portion of her income. The second consequence was Zach. As soon as his name appeared in a legal filing that hinted at a subpoena for his personal security footage, he vanished. He didn't just distance himself, he went into full lockdown. He blocked Sable's number. He instructed his own lawyer to communicate that he had no involvement and would not be participating in their domestic dispute. The man who would just write the check wanted nothing to do with the bill. Sable was left completely, utterly alone. The final, most devastating consequence was the financial settlement. Ms. Davies used Braylon's meticulous evidence to argue for an unequal distribution of assets. The infidelity was not the legal lever. The financial infidelity was. The documented spending sprees, the use of marital funds to facilitate the affair, it all painted a picture of a partner acting in bad faith. The judge agreed. Braylon was awarded the Lodo condo, which he immediately listed for sale. He kept his entire Lockheed Martin 401k, valued at over $450,000. Crucially, the judge ruled that his unvested RSUs were his separate property, part of his future earnings, not a marital asset. That decision alone saved him a projected $200,000. Sable walked away with her small IRA, half of the equity from the sale of the condo, after fees and paying back the money she dissipated, and her personal belongings. To cover her mounting legal fees, she was forced to sell the white BMW 3 Series. The last Braylon heard, from a mutual acquaintance, she was driving a 5-year-old Kia Forte and looking for a second job. The social fallout was just as brutal. Their mutual friends, who had once been her sycophantic audience, saw Braylon's quiet dignity and the cold, hard facts of the case. They sided with him. Sable, the ultimate social creature, found herself an outcast. Her world, built on appearances and connections, had collapsed into dust. 2 years passed. The rain that had been forecast for that fateful Thursday finally fell, washing the city clean. And then the sun came out, brilliant and healing. For Braylon, life began to rebuild itself, not on the fractured blueprint of his old life, but on a new, solid foundation of his own design. He sold the Lodo condo, the glass tower that had come to feel like a prison, and walked away with a significant profit. He took that money and bought a smaller, warmer, 2-bedroom condo near Washington Park for $550,000. It had a large balcony that he filled with plants and a view of the mountains, not the city. It was his space, filled with his things, books, hiking gear, and a high-end sound system for his jazz records. The second bedroom became his home office and a guest room for when Leo, his nephew, stayed over. At work, he thrived. Freed from the constant low-level stress of his marriage, his focus sharpened. He poured his energy into the complex problems he loved to solve. He was promoted to senior systems lead, a position that came with more responsibility and a salary bump to $165,000. But the real change wasn't the title or the money. He started a mentorship program within the space division, specifically reaching out to engineering programs at historically black colleges and universities. He wanted to build pathways for brilliant young black engineers, to give them the guidance and support he wished he'd had early in his career. He found a deep, resonant purpose in it, a satisfaction that no luxury purchase had ever provided. He was building something that would last. His new life was quiet, ordered, and peaceful. He woke up early, ran the 3-mile loop around Washington Park as the sun rose over the city, his feet pounding the pavement in a steady, meditative rhythm. He spent weekends hiking in the mountains, finding solace in the grandeur and silence of the Rockies. He reconnected with old friends. He spent hours at Rio's place, not as a refugee but as a brother and uncle, playing video games with Leo and having long talks with Rio about art, life, and everything in between. One Sunday afternoon, he was at Rio's for a barbecue. The smell of grilled chicken filled the air, and the sound of laughter echoed in the backyard. Leo, now 9 years old, ran up to him, clutching a piece of construction paper. "I made this for you, Uncle Bray," he said, his voice full of breathless pride. Braylon took the drawing. It was a picture of a man with neat, short hair and glowing, deep brown skin, drawn with a brown crayon. The man was standing next to a magnificent multi-stage rocket that was blasting off into a star-filled sky. The man in the drawing was smiling, a wide, genuine smile. Underneath, in a child's careful scrawl, it said, "Uncle Braylon goes to Mars." He felt a lump form in his throat. He knelt down to Leo's level. "This is the best drawing I have ever seen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, buddy." He held the simple piece of paper, the crayon lines feeling more real and more valuable than any stock certificate or property deed. This was true wealth. He thinks about Sable sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of distant pity. He heard she moved to California to try and start over. He hopes she finds peace. He has forgiven her, not for her comfort, but for his own. Holding on to that anger was like carrying a dead weight, and he had a universe to explore. True wealth, he now understands, isn't measured by the price tag of your car or the square footage of your house. It's not found in quartz countertops or designer clothes. True wealth is integrity. It is peace of mind. It is the unconditional love of family and the quiet satisfaction of building something meaningful. A system built on a faulty foundation of lies and materialism is destined for a catastrophic failure. Sometimes the only path forward is a controlled demolition and a complete rebuild on the solid ground of your own character. That is the system that will never let you down. We all face moments that test our foundations. Have you ever had to make a choice as difficult as Braylon's? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories about finding strength in the face of betrayal. Your story matters here.